The pressure mounts on the GOP to denounce Trump, and the opioid crisis gets emergency status. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Joe Ingles, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio, Darrell Rowland, public affairs editor for the Columbus Dispatch, Bob Clegg, Republican strategist, and Joseph Moss of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition. While U.S. Senators Bob Corker, John McCain, and Jeff Flake get personal with Donald Trump, Ohio's GOP Senator Rob Portman prefers to stick to policy. Corker, McCain, and Flake all basically call President Trump's actions dangerous for the country. When pressed repeatedly on CNN, Portman would not go that far.
Just as I worked with President Obama, as you may know, I had 50 of my bills signed into law by him. I didn't agree with him on a lot of things, but I worked with him. I continue to work with the Trump administration. I also speak out when I disagree with them, and there's no reason you can't do that.
Bob Clegg, why is he so reluctant to take any position at all on what Trump is saying?
Well, I mean, he's being a realist here. President Trump's going to be president of the United States for another over 3 years. And he's going to be a member of the Senate for that period of time because he just got reelected. So he has another over 5 years left in his Senate term. So I think he's just being practical, and this is going to be the president. I'm going to have to work with him to get things done. Why would I go out of my way to try to take him on? Plus, with this president, if you try to take him on, he's going to punch back.
That's what Jeff Flake was saying. Silence is acquiescence. Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, we can talk about any president. We can talk about President Obama, and I'm sure there were Democrats that disagreed with a lot of his proposals, and there was no hue and outcry to, why aren't you talking against the president? I mean, he's president of the United States. He was duly elected. You got to work with him to get things done. Why pick a fight with him?
Well, I don't think that anybody's inviting anybody to get into a fight because of policy or because of something that legitimate. I think that what they're pushing back against is what some of us would classify as being unpresidential or being downright mean. I don't think that there is a place for that in the national narrative. And I understand why CNN would be pressing Senator Portman on that, because 4 other senators have brought up the issue, and I think it merits some examination.
Joe, is he just trying to stay off? Is Rob Portman just trying to stay off Donald Trump's Twitter radar?
Well, a lot of people think that, and probably. I mean, honestly, this president uses Twitter in a way that no other president has used it. He uses social media in a different way, and if you happen to be on the receiving end of one of his attacks, it can really damage you politically. A lot of Republicans agree with President Trump, and when he goes out after someone, they'll back him. And you got to remember that with redistricting, a lot of these people who are running are having to run to the far right in order to get votes.
Darrell, I mean, Rob Portman's got 5 years left. He's not having the answers to the voters for quite some time. You'd think he might be a little more free to criticize the president if he felt it needed it. I mean, it's easy if you're leaving office to criticize Trump,
sure,
as these guys are. But
sure.
Portman's got a little bit of cushion there.
Well, I guess that's one way of looking at it, but that's not Rob Portman.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget, he's been considered to be a running mate, at least 2 times, maybe even 3 times. If you're real outspoken, you usually don't get that. He's a guy they knew would go along, not make waves or whatever. But there's a flip side of that. If you want him to be outspoken, stand up and make a splash, that's not Rob Portman either. Now, there are a couple things to remember. One is he did not vote for Donald Trump, which I understand the president has reminded him of from time to time. From time to time, he has spoken out. After the Charlottesville incident, Senator Portman was one of the first ones. Now, a lot of people would like him to be speaking out a lot more. A lot of people would like him to take positions on things like the Graham-Cassidy Health Care Act. Gee, who remembers that? But he never did say whether he'd vote yes or no on that. So he's frustrating, but love him or hate him, this is what you got, Ohio.
If I recall that he did step out early on one issue and he got hammered for it, Bob. So
yeah,
and it was one of the health care bills.
And let's not forget the politics of all this. It's not like we're surprised that the president is acting this way. I mean, during the campaign, we saw the way he was going to be. Okay, people that voted for millions of people voted for him, and he won. The reason why they voted for Donald Trump was to blow up the system. Now, you all are sitting around here saying, this is so different than it's been. Well, you know what? That's the way it was supposed to be. And I'll tell you what, among the people that voted for Donald Trump, his approval rating is still sky high. And they were enough, last year to elect him president, and they may be enough to re-elect him president in 3 years.
One thing that I'm very concerned about, Joe brought it up, and that is getting challenged from the right, because I will advance the notion that the right, it's different. The right today, because of Donald Trump, is different than the right was a year ago or 2 years ago. And I'm very concerned about that because it includes a whole set of things, including falsehoods and the type of language that is advanced that we hadn't seen before.
But also the left
Party.
is different too, and we saw that in Berkeley with these groups coming in to try to shut down speech on campuses, and they've turned to violence.
But that's not the leadership, Bob.
No,
That's
I know, but I'm saying
not
you're saying the right's changed, well, so has the left.
Yeah, but
has
I'm
changed.
not trying to include, for example, the white nationalist or the Ku Klux Klan in the same narrative with respect
But there
to the
are
Republican
people
Party.
on the left that are office holders that do believe that speech like that shouldn't be allowed on campuses because they've gone so far to the left, they want it shut down because they think it's incendiary.
Well, I
So
think
does our Ohio Republican governor, John Kasich.
I think incendiary language may have to be controlled in some way, and the Supreme Court said that over 100 years ago.
Okay, speaking of incendiary language, Sherrod Brown faced criticism this week after he was asked if he agreed with Congresswoman Frederica Wilson of Florida's characterization of members of the Trump administration.
The Congresswoman told the New York Times this week that the White House is full of white supremacists. You were at the White House this week. Do you agree with her?
I agree that Steve Bannon is a white supremacist, and Stephen Miller seems to be, and I know that studies have shown that they have their allies sprinkled around the White House.
Stephen Miller serves as a senior advisor to the president. Steve Bannon, and he did serve as an advisor until he left this summer. The White House called Brown's remark outrageous and slanderous. Brown's 2018 opponent, Josh Mandel, called the remarks desperate and beneath the dignity of the office. Joe Mas, was that beneath the dignity of the U.S. Senate?
Well, of course not. As a matter of fact, I think that's a narrative that's going to stick around for as long as Donald Trump is president, and as long as Donald Trump doesn't repudiate some of the divisive language that is included in Breitbart, and that is to go back to Bob's challenge of a few minutes ago, that is advanced by some of his supporters. Now, I want to say one thing about Mandel's comment, because you don't say stuff like that if you're desperate. If you're desperate, you try to reach out to the other side and to maybe appease some of Trump's supporters, not necessarily challenge it in this way.
Bob?
Well, here's the problem the Democrats have, and they've created it themselves. They've been calling anybody who disagreed with President Obama for the last 8 years a racist. They've used it so much that now when they feel like they really have a reason to use it, everybody goes, oh, well, that's just the same old, same old. I think he's trying, I think Sherrod Brown's trying to appease his left wing backers. And it's typical politics from him. He's a lifelong politician. He's going to keep throwing out stuff like this until until the re-election's done.
Darrell, it wasn't a cautious, he was asked the question, but it wasn't a cautious response. I mean, do you think he regrets using that strong a language?
No, I was in contact with his office just yesterday because I wanted to follow up a little bit on this. Say, okay, you made a very serious accusation here, a fairly serious pejorative label here of someone who's well known nationally. What's your basis for that? And his office sent me back a couple of news articles, one, oddly enough, quoting John Weaver, who's John Kasich's top political strategist, the other quoting Mitch McConnell's former chief of staff, who also called him a white supremacist. John Weaver's language is a little bit more generic. And that was the basis for that. I was surprised that that's what it was. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Joe, it's almost a race for the bottom. Name calling, could that backfire on Democrats? We saw it backfire on Republican challengers or competitors to Donald Trump in the primary in 2016, Marco Rubio, Rudy Giuliani, people like that. Will this backfire on Democrats?
You know, I don't know. It's going to depend on the mood at the time, really. But I think that there is a definitely, you know, we were talking about how things have changed. There's definitely a difference in tone and a difference in the reaction to the tone. If you look at communities now, you have whole groups of people who have pretty much coalesced around, you know, having a better tone in government. They didn't exist a few years ago. So we're seeing more of that. I don't know if we're ever going to truly see what was the moderate Republican that we would have called it 6 years ago. But I do think that there is a set of people out there that are getting sick and tired of the name calling and Washington's, you know, progress or lack thereof.
It's interesting, though. You read accurately Josh Mandel's response to that, but you know where he gave it to? He gave it to Breitbart, Steve Bannon's publication. So it becomes a little incestuous after a while. It's like Steve Bannon back with Breitbart. Josh Mandel calls Breitbart. They bash Sherrod Brown for bashing the head of Breitbart. It's like, wow.
Bob, is there a method to that madness? Is Josh Mandel hoping to get some support from Steve Bannon?
Well, no, I think he's looking at the election next year and trying to get the voters that are going to be motivated enough to vote next year. And he's looking at Republican voters. And a lot of them, I mean, I think we're seeing now that a lot of the motivated voters are going to be the Trump voters. They're going to be motivated to come out in the midterm, and I think that's what he's looking at.
Because Bannon's targeting quote, establishment Republicans who have primary opponents. Josh Mandel really doesn't. He does have an opponent, but he's underfunded. So he doesn't have to really worry about a primary too much.
He does in this respect. His primary opponent's outside the system. So if you're looking at the kind of people that Steve Bannon is backing, that Mike Gibbons would be somebody he might be able to back. So, you know, there may be some of that Josh playing it safe, too.
Yeah, and Bob and I will agree, I think, every time that in an off-year election, it's the faithful who are going to get out and
the
play.
true blue believers.
And the Republicans have had much better luck. I hate to use that word.
It's
but
hard work, Joe. Hard work.
I think you have a better organic turnout than Democrats do. Democrats we do have to be more inspired. And that is
you need a candidate to inspire you.
And hopefully, and candidates to inspire us, like in the case of Obama.
Does Josh Mandel go along with Mr. Bannon's efforts, though, to oust Mitch McConnell? I mean, he's got to do a balancing act there. Does he get Bannon's money then? That will cut him off from the McConnell gravy train.
I don't think he necessarily wants Bannon's money. I think what he wants is to make sure that individuals that are reading his publication and or blog, will be Josh Mandel supporters. I don't think it has anything to do with campaign contributions.
But he's modeled himself so much after Donald Trump.
Well, because you know why? Donald Trump won Ohio last year. Okay, he won Ohio by the biggest margin of any presidential candidate since 1988. So, I mean, that tells you something right there. If you want to win the state of Ohio, looking at Donald Trump and the people that voted for him probably is a good way to go.
Let's get to our next topic. As we enter the final 2 months of 2017, the 2018 election field will begin to solidify. Candidates have until February to officially file, but each day sitting on the sidelines means exposure, money, and votes lost. The 4 Democrats running for governor will debate twice on Sunday. Let's play 2. Once on TV, once at the Democratic Party Forum. They are still waiting for Richard Cordray to make a decision on entering the race. And in a bit of a surprise, House Speaker Cliff Rosenberger, who is term limited, said this week he may run for state auditor against former Senate President Keith Faber. Joe Ingles, Cliff Rosenberger, why would he take on Keith Faber?
You know, this is really interesting. He definitely has his followers, and so does former Senator Faber. They both have their allies, and they both have their opponents. And it's kind of setting up some of what we're talking about here, that Rosenberger has a lot of friends who have a lot of money. And he can definitely come into this and be formidable against Senator Faber.
So he would be the establishment candidate, and now Representative Faber. I'm trying to figure who's who.
I don't think he'd want to be referred to as the establishment candidate. He would probably, they both would probably want not to be referred to that way. Okay. But I think he would be the, he would see himself as the voice of reason. You know, he could come in and as he said, he's from Wilmington, Ohio, which is kind of a rural area, and he has a lot of, brings a lot of perspective to the table. And I mean, I know Faber is from up northwest, so he's a rural area as well, but there's a different dynamic there.
Bob is a Republican strategist. I've seen the party does not want to see this primary.
Well, we just had 2 primaries that just went away within the last 2 weeks, and
Treasurer and
Secretary of State. But like you just said, we're 3 months away from the filing deadline. We're 6 months away from the actual primary itself. Still a lot of time for people to think this through. And of course, the Democrats really even haven't solidified who's running for governor yet. So, and we may see even on our side the governor situation change, maybe. Either somebody else coming in or somebody dropping out. I mean, we still have a lot of time here, and I think a lot of candidates or potential candidates want to think this through before they make a final decision, because we are getting to that point.
We should mention also Cliff Rosenberger is thinking about running for county commissioner in Clinton County. So
yeah. Well, this is, I mean, if there's ever a downside to the Republicans' amazing success in Ohio, winning elections left and right, it's this. When you run out of term limits, then there are only so many places to accommodate if you want to shift and move and all that. That's why we have 3 statewide office holders running for governor, plus a sitting member of Congress, and other, on down the ticket. So it's crowded at the top.
It could be more crowded than the Democratic governor's race if Cordray jumps in. It's been another week, week of no word from Richard Cordray.
It's from Cordray, and
what do you hear?
I checked today to find out if there was any movement on that, and I mean, they appear absolutely sincere that he wants to stick it out. Of course, if something dramatic happens beyond his control, then we will see him in the race. But otherwise, we have 4 good candidates, and may the best man or woman win, I suppose. That's what it'll get down to.
So right now the thinking is he will not enter the race. He'll stay in
right
Washington.
Now, if you were to ask me today, I would say that he's not.
What does that mean for those 4 candidates? Does another candidate jump in? William O'Neill from the state Supreme Court has been talked about.
He has, and as a matter of fact, I think he has some sort of something going on in the next couple of days back in his hometown, and is going to make an announcement. So that might very well happen.
Well, I think if he does jump in on the Democrat side, that's going to shake things up a lot. Not that he...
You mean William O'Neill?
Yeah, William O'Neill. And actually, I think the Democrats are smart not to have Cordray because, as we saw last year, the candidates the Democrats put up that were well-known, like Ted Strickland in Ohio and Hillary Clinton nationwide, lost because people wanted something new and different. And that's where I think the Democrats would go wrong by going with Cordray. He's been around for the last 20 years. I know he's not that old, but he has, and I think they'd be much better off with somebody new. O'Neill is interesting in that, he won that Supreme Court race without spending a single dime. Yeah. And that didn't happen often in statewide races here in Ohio. So obviously he's got something, it's the O name. But when you're in that crowded of a race, 5 people, the O name may be enough to get you over the finish line in the end.
And by the way, while I appreciate the compliment about being smart, the Democrats are making this decision regarding Cordray. Cordray is making the decision.
Well, that's why I know I probably gave the Democrats way too much credit.
But I appreciate it.
One more bit of campaign news. $58 million, Daryl. $58 million is what these opponents of Issue 2, the drug price issue, mainly the drug companies, are spending to defeat it.
Oh, exclusively the drug companies, yeah. New record for a single advocacy on an issue campaign. By far, from our research, the old record was the folks backing the casino issue back in 2009 when it finally did pass. And if they keep getting more money, I mean, their spokesman says, well, no, we're done raising money. It's like, yeah, I haven't seen a politician yet that's done raising money. And, with almost an unlimited checkbook, quite frankly, it could go even higher. And if the other side spends a little bit more, it could be, in terms of a race, also Ohio's all-time spending leader.
The yes side, Joe, is spending or has raised $14 million, which in a normal year, especially an odd number year election, would be an incredible amount of money. But it's being dwarfed by the other side.
It is being dwarfed by the other side, and it's not only the money, it's the organization. The anti-side, the opposition, has got basically every walk of life. Someone from representing them is on the campaign against issue 2. Doctors and nurses and veterans and old people and young people and former Medicaid directors, and you name it, they're against issue 2. And I think you also have the editorials that are by and large coming out against it. So you put all this in the cauldron together, and you're going to come up with a formula that is going to be hard for the issue 1 folks to beat,
All right, let's
or
get to
issue 2 folks to beat.
Let's get to our last topic. We Ohioans know the opiate epidemic is a healthcare emergency. Overdoses are taking, on average, 14 lives every day in Ohio. Many other states are seeing the same thing. So this week, President Trump declared the opioid crisis a national healthcare emergency.
As Americans, we cannot allow this to continue. It is time to liberate our communities from this scourge of drug addiction. Never been this way. We can be the generation that ends the opioid epidemic. We can do it.
The declaration falls short of calling the epidemic a national emergency, which he suggested he would do back in August, and it's what his opioid commission recommended. Daryl, what's the difference between a national emergency and a national health emergency?
Right. Well, it's more than just words. First of all, the president, although that clip you just played was among the most eloquent and frankly hopeful words I've heard from Donald Trump since he emerged on the public scene back in 2015, public political scene, I should say. But it represents a broken promise. If you take him at his word, he used the word national emergency 2 months ago when he first talked about, and within days of making this actual announcement. And what people in Ohio and local governments around here are saying, no new money. If he would have declared a national state of emergency, there's something called the Stafford Act that triggers some federal disaster relief funds. It's like after a tornado or hurricane, the money pretty much flows right away. Now, the Trump folks have reasoned that's not really appropriate for this, and, well, maybe or maybe not. The other thing that's going on at this, with the left hand, while we're doing this with the opioids declaring a health emergency, we're cutting the rate of spending increases on Medicaid. We're against the Medicaid expansion, which in states like Ohio, of course, is helping that. Now, the good stuff, there's more flexibility in using federal funds for states like Ohio. There's telemedicine that can help areas like Appalachia. It's been so hard hit. But the Public Health Emergency Fund has like $57,000 or $1 million, or not enough to do much of anything.
Bob, do Republicans have to put some money behind this now that he's declared this? Will they do it?
Yeah, and they will. And the president said himself that there's going to be something coming with more dollars attached to it. I'm just happy that he saw the need to do this. This has been a problem for the last 5 years. Washington hasn't felt the need, I guess, to even call it a national health emergency, which I could not figure out why the previous administration hadn't.
John Kasich hasn't declared an emergency in Ohio. I don't know what that would do, but he hasn't used those words. I mean, he's given a lot of money, or expanded Medicaid, which expanded treatment services.
Yeah, I don't know in Ohio if we have a similar type of situation where if it's a health emergency or just an emergency, whether that frees up more state dollars or not for it. But obviously the legislature here in Ohio has given more money in the most recent budget towards this fight.
Yeah, and I think this needed to be done at the federal level. I agree. I'm not sure that Kasich doing that would have done it, because the funds are authorized, the Medicaid funds are authorized, or are federal funds, and they have to be authorized then by the president. And so in that respect, from what I've heard from the experts, that's the step forward. But again, no new monies.
You need money for treatment. This OSU study said that it's costing, the crisis is costing Ohio or $9 billion.
Yep.
But the president was talking about an ad campaign to keep kids away from drugs. It reminded me of the Just Say No campaign.
Right.
Is he stuck back in the 80s with Nancy Reagan? Is that really going to work?
Well, we've got that here in Ohio. We've got basically the Just Say No campaign on a statewide level. But you've got to realize this is costing more in Ohio than educating our kids. So it's a huge problem. We've got to, something has to be done. And there has been money dedicated to it, but I think a lot of people would say that's not nearly enough.
And Mike, I was surprised because at least from what I have been exposed to, I thought that most people suffering from this were actually, and they are, over the age of 26. Yeah. However, the largest growing percentage are actually children between the ages of 12 and 17.
All right, get to our off-the-record parting shots. Joe, you're up first.
I am, and an article in Thursday's Columbus Dispatch kind of caught my eye. The NRA is promoting insurance for concealed carry members. If you take your gun and you shoot somebody, they will send a legal team to your house to tell you what to tell the police and then represent you in court. So that made me wonder, is the NRA promoting gun ownership or shooting people?
Bob.
We've been talking about the Issue 2 campaign, but I want everybody to remember that there's a lot of other things on the ballot 10 days from now, including city councilmen, mayors in villages, cities, township trustees. You got to get out and vote.
Daryl.
One thing that's flown totally under the radar of most news coverage is the state controlling board is going to decide whether we're going to have Medicaid funding on Monday. They're still mad about Kasich's Medicaid expansion. They're holding hundreds of thousands of dollars hostage, if you believe the administration. They're going to decide that.
And Joe.
One thing that I think Rich Cordray is going to be doing this weekend is some serious soul searching, because this week he was dealt a little bit of a blow and an indication as to where the administration stands and where Congress stands when it comes to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Okay, the Crew have advanced in the playoffs. They have a game on Tuesday night, I believe, Halloween. I predict a sellout, whether or not it keeps them in the city or not, but my guess is the fans will come out. And don't forget, on Wednesday, another Politics and a Pint is back. Nothing brings the country together like beer. So come tip a pint glass with us, talk politics at Wolf's Ridge Brewing downtown. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.